Hello. So today we'll be talking about discrimination and Hinduphobia, specifically social issues facing second-generation Hindu Americans. But before I even get into the Hinduphobia part or the second-generation Hindu Americans, let's first talk about discrimination. What is discrimination? When we think of discrimination as a concept, a lot of things can come to mind, as discrimination can happen to literally anyone, anywhere, at any time. It's hard to put a definitive label on this phenomenon. So we'll start with the definition of discrimination. The official definition of discrimination is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. And to some, this may cover all of the grounds of what discrimination is, but it actually doesn't. Let's stop for a second and just imagine. Now, I want you to close your eyes and think. When you hear the word discrimination, what comes to mind? I'll give you a second to think. You probably pictured some of these scenarios. Maybe even this. Now, I especially like this picture because it illustrates the system of discrimination so simply. I like to look at it as a natural selection process. Society chooses some people to rise to the top, and the others are left behind to scatter like rats. It's an unfortunate analogy, but this is how it is. Now, regardless of what you pictured, the fact of the matter is discrimination is rampant, and it comes in all different forms. It could be as mild as not talking to someone because they're a certain way. It could go a little bit further, like limiting their scope for growth in an office setting, not offering them many opportunities. Sometimes it goes to the extreme, and this happens. Everyone knows who this is, right? Adolf Hitler, ruthless dictator of Germany, one of the most extreme, notorious racists of world history. Now, I know you might be thinking, okay, this is a little extreme. What the Jews, homosexuals, disabled, Romanis, etc. went through is on another plane of awfulness. It was unbelievable. This is all true, and the horrors these innocent people went through is so unimaginable. Some people would refuse to believe that this even happened. So let's look at the numbers to prove them wrong. 6 million Jews, 7 million Soviet civilians, 250,000 disabled people, 250,000 Romanis, 70,000 homosexuals, and countless others all died at the hands of relentless bigotry, hatred, and discrimination. But that isn't all. We remember the Holocaust and weep for those who lost their lives, and still there are others. Over 3,000 indigenous Native Americans died on the Trail of Tears. Thousands before them slaughtered on their own reserve, were killed in the name of civilization. Many millions of LGBTQ plus members in history were killed, arrested, or denied opportunity throughout history due to sodomy laws, some of which America still had in place until 2003. And in our own Indian history, almost 2 million people lost their lives and 14 million were displaced in the partition of 1947. Horrific things happen in history, things buried so deep in the pages of the world's biography that some of us will probably never even know that they happened. In this presentation, we'll be dissecting the many layers of discrimination to further understand where, why, and how it even occurs. But before we begin, we have to make a clear distinction. Discrimination isn't disliking someone who isn't like you. It's disliking them because they're not like you. Now, some of us will never experience this level of discrimination, but some of us will never stop experiencing it. It affects billions upon billions of people every day. So how does it even start? So when scientists and psychologists try to figure out why human beings do the things that they do, this idea comes into play a lot. Nature versus nurture. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of nature versus nurture, it goes something like this. Nature is the idea that people are inherently a certain way. For instance, if a child is from birth treated roughly and neglected, but it's in their nature to be humble and kind, they will be, regardless of everything else. It's the idea that your consciousness has already decided who you are, and no circumstancing or parenting will affect this. Nurture, unlike nature, is the idea that people are always changing and growing, and no one is inherently anything. For instance, if a child is born into a wealthy family and they have everything they could ever want, but they've become subject to bad parenting, it'll take its toll on the child eventually. The environment, the people, the overall atmosphere, these are all factors in a child's behavior and instincts. So where does discrimination come into play? Whether you believe in nature or nurture, in the development of any child, these two factors come into play at some point in a child's life. Talents, specific tendencies, likes and dislikes are just some of the things that are inherent. Talents can be built upon with time, but there's a spark that's there to begin with that allows talents to flourish. Whether it's just being good at the thing or pure hard work, something's there to make you want to be good at it. Beliefs, ideologies, political views, these things fall under nurture. Regardless of whether you're strictly undecided or totally unbiased, other people, the media, your families, etc., these things can all affect how you think and what you believe. And because of the nurture aspect of life, things like the media, influencers, so-called experts, tell us how and what to think without us even knowing that these ideas and beliefs aren't our own. This is where discrimination flourishes. Hatred, bigotry, discrimination is all taught. No child inherently believes a group of people is bad or that they should direct hatred toward this group of people. It's told to them. While children oftentimes refuse to listen to their parents, they're actually always listening. It goes something like this. Let's take a child. This child. This child believes something. Let's say they believe that cats can fly. It's a ridiculous idea, I know, but this child believes it wholeheartedly. Why does he believe it? He believes it because it's what his parents told him. And this absurd non-fact has been repeated to him so many times that he has no choice but to assume it's the truth. Now, why do the parents even tell this kid that cats can fly? One theory is that they want to mess with their child. See the look on their face in the late future when they come to the shocking realization that cats, indeed, cannot fly. Another theory, much more plausible, is that the parents themselves believe this. Why? Because their parents told them, and their parents before that told them, and it goes on and on backwards for years and years, and everybody believed it. Now, I know you might be thinking, come on, this is ridiculous. Of course, nobody would believe this. This is too outlandish. No one with the right mind could possibly think this way. What if I said people did think this way? Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 was a horrible time and place to be different. Little girls in the town of Salem started screaming randomly, going insane. So their parents called over the local physician to ask, hey, what's happening with my child? The physicians had no answer. It was the 1600s. Nobody knew anything. So they came up with the only logical explanation they could think of. They said, sir, ma'am, your children are possessed by witches. And suddenly, almost overnight, people everywhere started being accused of being witches. If you, dressed differently, couldn't bear children, or weren't Puritan Christians. So many women and men were executed based on mere superstition. And my God, you wouldn't believe how easy it is to get people to blindly believe whatever you want them to, because the entire thing lies in the hands of the narrative. Now, the narrative is a tricky, almost fluid concept. It exists as the truth, but it's misinformation that allows a common people to believe that their acts of discrimination against others are justified because this narrative is treated like it's the law. And once this narrative soaks into a people's brain completely, virtually anything can happen. Let's look at one such case. Germany, late 1929 was hell on earth for people who lived there. Because of the Treaty of Versailles that was put into action after the fall of Germany in World War I, Germany had next to nothing to claim as their own. The treaty regulated that Germany couldn't have the large army that they had before. They had to surrender several of their territories to the Allies, and as a result, the country experienced its first Great Depression. Germany's people were desperate, and they were just looking for a way out. Hitler gave them a way out. He told the German people that he would put an end to the Depression, and he did, by breaking all the conditions listed in the Treaty of Versailles and mass-producing weaponry. It seemed as though Hitler was getting ready for war. And the people of Germany backed him up 100% because of the narrative he displayed. The Jews are stealing your jobs. They're crippling our country and our economy. Do you want their children running amongst ours? German-speaking countries belong to Germany alone. It is our duty to reclaim them, whatever the cost. And they sing a tune of hatred and self-idolizing as they extended their arms and chorused Heil Hitler. There's an argument that people aren't inherently anything, and no human being is born this evil, much less a whole nation. It's the narrative that Hitler displayed to these desperate people that made them ignore the bad and fill it in with good. It takes one person to begin with, but once the narrative isn't claimed by any single person, it's untamed and fatally dangerous. At the end of the day, it's not the people that control the narrative. It's the narrative that controls the people. Now, that's not to say that every German was willing to bend at the will of this narrative. Many German families disagreed with Hitler's anti-Semitic beliefs, but a large majority of them didn't want to put their families in danger by airing their views. A select few decided to do something about the cruelty of the Nazi Party, and so they formed a resistance. They did wonders. They supplied people with food and water and shelter when they were most vulnerable to Nazi attacks. Women, men, children, teenagers of all races and religions banded together to fight a greater evil. But at the end of the day, it simply couldn't keep up with the brainwashing ability of the narrative, and that's why millions upon millions of innocent people perished at the hands of pure evil. Discrimination only flourished when the false narrative was shoved down the throats of these desperate people, and it still does today. Nowadays, people will still try to put down minority groups to make themselves look taller. Let me give you some examples. These people will come out and say the only role of a woman is to cook, clean, and bear children. Who stands up to them? These people will come out and say that the LGBTQ plus community is mentally ill and corrupting the youth. Who stands up to them? These people will brutally murder innocent black civilians and be pardoned because they have privilege. Who stands up to them? These people come out and say that Indian immigrants are taking their jobs and that the Vedas originated from somewhere else in Europe. Who stands up to them? No one. There's a word for that when people discriminate against Hindus, belittle them, condemn our culture and customs. It's called Hinduphobia. It's real, it's rampant, but to some, it doesn't exist. I found this on Reddit the other day. It says, Hinduphobia does not exist. Change my mind. Can't hate the unknown. Yes, I know there are some Muslims who see Hindus as idolaters and demon worshippers. We're talking about general people here, not the fanatics. Hinduphobia doesn't exist. The only ones who whine about it are far-right Sanghis who can't handle any valid criticism about their ideology. And below this discussion, someone left a comment saying, honestly, in the West, nobody actually gives a one way or the other about Hinduism. It's seen as too bizarre to understand unless you're a hippie type who wants enlightenment. In fact, many people disregard this issue, saying it doesn't exist, that Hindus don't face any adversity. This is the viewpoint of a Hindu who just wanted to get from point A to point B with their sister. This is what happened. I went through a traumatic experience today. An Uber driver targeted me for my religious and ethnic identity. He started ranting about how you Hindus are killing Muslims in India, adding that the Hindus were destroying mosques. He kept getting angrier. He kept on accusing and at one point got so angry he stopped the car and asked me and my sister to get down. It's not uncommon for people to base their views off of snippets of misinterpreted news and back their half-baked opinions with passion. And thus is the case with Hinduism, as it was put rather explicitly before. Nobody cares. And it doesn't just stop there. Political candidate Tulsi Gabbard wrote an article exposing the Hinduphobia she'd become subject to in politics. Tulsi Gabbard, in her article, has also made references to the attacks made against her by political opponents during the 2012 and 2014 elections, when her Republican opponent had stated publicly that a Hindu should not be allowed to serve in the U.S. Congress, and that Hinduism is incompatible with the U.S. Constitution. In the 2016 race for Congress, her Republican opponent said repeatedly that a vote for her was a vote for the devil because of her religion. Blatant discrimination goes unchecked in politics. Idiotic ideals run free, like how Gabbard's campaign was unconstitutional because it wasn't compatible with the Constitution, a system created by the Founding Fathers that stated America had no official religion, so pray tell. How is it unconstitutional? And the reason people get away with this is because, on the whole, the Hindu community is far too docile. When people misrepresent our religion, we sit by and watch, held back by the fear of being politically incorrect or offensive. We don't stand up. We're too afraid. And that's where our issue begins. Now, if there's one thing that hasn't done Hinduism any favors, it's the print media. And the media were portrayed as job-stealing, women-oppressing bigots, and for those who say I'm exaggerating, I kid you not, this mentality is everywhere. I personally remember this happening, and it was only a year or two ago. I was sitting in the car with my father. The radio was turned on. They were doing a segment on women in India, so I turned up the volume and I leaned forward to listen. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The interviewee was saying all these unbelievable things about India. They were saying things like menstruating Hindu women were forced into isolation for their cycle to maintain the purity of the house. Hinduism always entails a patriarchy of distorted proportions. And a producer of this news corporation even tweeted, if Indians give up on Hinduism, they will also be solving most of their problems, what with all the urine drinking and dung worshipping. I was shocked. I started to doubt my Hindu dharma altogether, and I probably would have kept listening to this segment had my father not turned off the station after I expressed my confusion. He explained every part to me, how they're taking much more innocent things and twisting them to make flashy headlines and stories. This first one was actually, menstruating Hindu women are allowed days off during their cycles so they can rest. The second one is, Hinduism literally has holidays to celebrate women, but when these women are following their dharma and serving their families, it's suddenly a patriarchy. And this last one can be roughly translated to, Hindus have rituals, just like any other culture, none of which involve aimless urine drinking or dung worshipping. My mind was put to rest. But then I realized I only received clarity because there was someone there with me to argue against the fake news I was hearing. Had my father not been there in the car with me, I probably would have kept believing this. But not everyone listening to this segment had someone there with them to tell them what they were hearing was wrong. I mean, who knows how many people were tuning in, hearing all these bad things about our culture, waiting to blame someone for something. Who knows how many anti-Hindu organizations were listening, waiting to have something to use against the Hindu community. And this isn't even the beginning. Everyone remembers the California textbook controversy, right? And if you aren't aware with this issue, I'll just briefly summarize for you. Basically, California issued a textbook with gross misinterpretations of Hinduism, and so the Hindu community fought back. They took it to court. And the California textbook people, they agreed to change some of the mistakes they made, but still not all of them. So let's just look at some of the things that were said in this textbook about Hinduism. These are direct quotes, by the way. Men had more rights than women. Yes, as can be seen by our several holidays celebrating our female goddesses, that's very evident. Thank you for that. The Monkey King, Hanuman, loved Rama so much that it is said that he is present every time the Ramayana is told. So look around. See any monkeys? Okay, so it appears as though the California textbook people have gained the ability to see God. That's fantastic. Good for them. Oh, and this last one is my personal favorite. A group of people known as the Indo-Aryans arrived in the Indus Valley about 1500 BC. These people developed a social structure called the caste system. Ah, yes, the Aryan invasion theory, one that's been disproven too many times to count. And the sad thing is, people really believed this stuff. I mean, the people writing the California textbooks even sat down with the Hindu community to fix some of these changes, as we said before, and they refused to correct some of them. And it's not just a misinterpretation. When you're a second generation Hindu American in a classroom full of people who haven't been properly educated on your culture, your religion, it's scary. Hitler himself once said he alone who controls the youth gains the future. If this misrepresentation keeps up, Hinduphobia will become the future. Because guess what? This narrative that grasps students by the neck, screaming into their ears that Hindus support a religion of misogyny, racism, and violence, it won't be long before this narrative consumes them. Students may look down upon their Hindu peers, and those Hindu students may look down upon themselves. Awful things are said about the Hindu community when we trust people who don't know the first thing about Hinduism to speak on our beliefs and customs. And more times than not, they completely butcher everything. This is Wendy Doniger, an American Indologist from New York. She's well known for her book, The Hindus and Alternative History. It's supposedly a quote-unquote alternative to the narrative of Hindu history that they tell us. Now imagine you're a college student and you're asked to do a project on the origins of Hinduism. You scan through the shelves at your local library when you stumble across the book that claims to tell the real story behind Hinduism, not the fake one that Hindutva fundamentalists have presented to the media. You read and you learn a lot of new facts about Hinduism. It says, Indian history begins with the Indus Valley civilization, which is not Hindu. Hinduism begins with the Nazi-like Aryans bringing the Vedic religion of sacrifice. Hinduism is full of violent animal sacrifice until Buddhism reforms it. There's no real golden age as such for Hinduism, but the Greek invasion leads to great ideas and works of fiction like the Ramayana and Mahabharata. The British colonized India. Hinduism is reformed. But once India is independent without these civilizing external forces, the Hindus have now become Hindutva fundamentalists. Yikes. So I'll let you take a minute to digest that. It's awful, I know. And what's worse is that this is what's taught in schools, or maybe not even taught at all. See, in the print media and in the minds of so many people, Hinduism is associated with these things. Sati, caste system, dowry. But when it comes to yoga, Ayurveda, science, mathematics, and our universal beliefs of equality, we're snubbed. There's no Hindu tag on these concepts, and thus the world doesn't understand our contributions. I'll give a small anecdote from my life. So when I was in 6th grade, that was the first time we were learning about world history. So I'm like super stoked. So I go into the classroom. First section is early humans, Neanderthals, and then we move on to section 2. Section 2 is ancient Mesopotamia, Babylonia. We learn about the earlier human civilizations, cuneiform, the invention of the wheel, all that good stuff. Then we move on to ancient Egypt, pyramids, hieroglyphics, the Nile River. And we're learning lots of new information. We're absorbing so much. And I just flip ahead just to see where we're going next. And section 4 is ancient India. Ancient India! That's us! That's literally us! So I'm super excited. I can't wait to get started on this. We're finally going to learn about my cultures, my customs in my classroom. This is going to be so exciting. Section 4! And then my teacher breaks my happy inner monologue with a turn your pages to section 5. And in my mind, I'm like, he skipped an entire section. How come he skipped an entire section? So I raised my hand. I said, hey, why do you skip an entire section? He said, oh, we can't fit everything into this half a year. So we're gonna have a project at the end of the year where you can take some of the topics we didn't discuss, make a presentation about them, and share them in class. So I'm a little agitated, but I'm like, okay, whatever. I'll just kill it for the final project. Final project comes along. I get ancient India, thankfully. And the rule is only use your textbook. Don't use the internet unless you absolutely have to. So I open up my book, and the first thing I see is a pyramid. A pyramid with Brahmins at the tops and Dalits at the bottoms. And I'm kind of confused. I'm like doing a double take, like, wait, this isn't how it is. It's what they did as their job. That's what the caste system is. It's been turned into something, it's been turned into a social hierarchy, which originally it was not. But, I'm a sixth grader. What do I know? Nothing, basically. So I keep putting it in my presentation. I keep reading. So then it says Siddhartha Gautama traveled across the country to find a new truth for himself because he was unsatisfied with the teachings of Hinduism. And I was like, I'm sorry, if this man has taken several things from Hinduism and created a new system of thinking, how is that being unsatisfied? That's finding a new truth. But, again, I don't know anything. So I put it in my presentation. I go up and then I come home. And then I showed it to my mom. I'm like, hey, Mom, you proud of me? And she looks at me with this disappointed stare. You know that stare. And she says, sit down. We have to fix this right now. So we sit down. We fix it. We stay up until 11 p.m. And then I get up there the next day. I present with full passion. And everybody's listening. Everybody's looking. Even my teacher has stopped mindlessly grading other things to actually pay attention because I just realized something right then. He didn't know some of the stuff I put in my presentation. He didn't know that we were pioneers of metallurgy. He didn't know that the Hindu-Arab system was originated in India. He didn't know that stuff. That's when reality hits, that people don't know. People don't know, but they'll teach whatever's in the textbook because that's obviously right. He didn't know, and my classmates would not have known had I not given this presentation. And misrepresentations of Hindu and its ideals don't just stop at textbooks. So virtually everyone shops on Amazon, correct? They're one of the biggest companies in the world. They are worth at least $1 trillion today. They've contributed about 168 billion to the US GDP since 2010, and they're one of the most influential companies in America. So what does Amazon have to do with Hinduism? What has Amazon ever done to Hinduism? Guys, so much. I mean, how am I supposed to feel as a Hindu American that Amazon has dubbed wearing sandals with Mahatma Gandhi's face on it the height of fashion? And it doesn't just stop here. It's slowly affecting the second generation, not just Hindu Americans, other Americans as well. Take a look at this. Do one YouTube search and we find this video. The history of the entire world, I guess. Now, personally, I've not met a single Gen Zer that hasn't seen this video at least 3 times. And for good reasons, too. Bill Wirtz is one of the funniest creators on YouTube, the father of the internet's most treasured memes and gags. And in his video explaining the history of the world, he's mostly factually correct. Except for this.
Version of the Greeks. Let's check in with the Indus River Valley civilization. They're gone. Guess who's not gone? China. New arrivals in India. Maybe it's those horse people I was talking about, or their cousins or something. And they wrote some hymns and mantras and stuff. You could make a religion out of this. There's the Bronze Age collapse.
And suddenly, all of Gen Z is convinced that the Aryan invasion theory is not a theory, but fact. All this misrepresentation aside, global superpowers and other external forces even went so far as to try to erase our culture from history itself. Here's an example. Ask any non-Hindu to tell you the first thing that comes to their mind when thinking of India. And more times than not, it's going to be the Taj Mahal. And that would be totally cool, and except for the fact that this monument is a mausoleum that houses the corpse of a Mughal emperor, the emperor of an army that's purpose was to convert, kill, and conquer, and his third wife, whom he married when she was 14 years old. It's bad enough that the Taj Mahal is a symbol of love when it involved the exploitation of 22,000 slaves, the destruction of a Shiva mandir, and a marriage that consisted of 19 years of constant childbirth since she was 19. This led to her death, by the way, but the media has made this the face of India and Hindu culture. So why is this happening? Why is our history so twisted and distorted in the eyes of the media? Well, the British Secretary of War explains it pretty well himself. I would strike at the root of the bad system which has hitherto been fostered by us. I would stop the printing of Arabic and Sanskrit books. I would abolish the Madrasa and Sanskrit College of Calcutta. The fund which would thus be placed at our disposal would enable us to give a larger encouragement to the Hindu College of Calcutta and establish in the principal cities throughout the schools in which the English language might be well and thoroughly taught. Basically, throw out Arabic, throw out Sanskrit, let's shove English down their throats until they don't know what else to do. They erased our culture that way. They erased our pride. And lots of minorities know when you have no pride, what else is there? And this system of brainwashing worked. My God, it worked. Why did it work? Well, as George Clooney said in The Monuments Men, you can wipe out a generation of people. You can burn their homes to the ground, and somehow they'll still come back. But if you destroy their achievements and their history, it's like they never existed. Just ash floating. And if we're all okay with this misrepresentation, there's no real reason for me to be giving this presentation. But to look for a solution, we need only look as far as the second generation. So when we look at where most of this discrimination is coming from, it appears to stem from the print media, newspapers, magazines, etc. And this may be because Indians are not taking jobs in journalism and reporting. While they occupy jobs in the fields of science and mathematics, the rest of America believes they're stealing their jobs, and there's nobody in the media to defend them. But with the birth of a new, more progressive generation, this could potentially change for good. Studies show that the average Gen Zer is more likely to be progressive and open to diversity and change. They take actions when discussing issues like racism, transphobia, gun control, and so many more. They realize it's nonsense to undermine those who don't conform to society's expectations, and armed with this mentality, they have the power to make a difference. And with the growing popularity of social media, people have discovered that they can express their opinions freely without being journalists themselves. Social media has become an outlet of creativity, and when utilized correctly and effectively, it shows great promise. With constant uninterrupted access to literally any social media platform, there's so much that can be done about Hinduphobia. The problem is we choose to ignore that it's happening, so much so that the next generation may not even know it exists. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is literally ingrained into our heads since childhood as Hindus. Is it not our duty to take the first step to eliminate this discrimination? If we don't, one day Hinduphobia will become as common as racism was in the 1950s. I'll tell you one more story. So when I was in preschool, I used to wear this gold chain Om necklace, and it was literally the best thing ever. I wore it like a badge of honor. I loved it a lot. So I wore it to preschool one day, and during nap time, one of the teachers tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, "Hey, what's that, honey? What's that around your neck?" So I hold it up. I say, "It's my Om necklace." I'm smiling, so cute. And then my teacher says, "That's nice, but can you please not wear it to school anymore?" So I was like, "Why?" And she said, No. It's just that some people might think it's offensive. So we'd like it if you didn't wear it anymore." So I barely knew what the word offensive meant. All I knew is that my teachers were telling me something, and if I didn't obey, I'd probably get yelled at. I did not want to get yelled at. So I took it off, never wore it again. I don't even know where it is now. In third grade, it was International Education Week, and I wore kurta and a bindi. And in the middle of class, my teacher calls me up to his desk, and he says, "Hey, what's that you're wearing on your forehead?" I say, "It's my bindi." He says, Could you take it off? I said, why? He said it goes against school dress code policy. So I was like, okay. Didn't want to get yelled at, I took it off. And I didn't question any of it. I figured it was normal for all of this to be happening, so I didn't tell any of these things to my parents when they happened. And it's one thing to use the excuse, oh, our parents didn't tell us about it, so it's not our fault. No, it's not our fault, but it becomes our fault if we know it exists and we do nothing about it. It becomes our fault once we become the ones who choose to ignore it. Even Catherine Plummer, a character from Newsies the Musical, said nothing happens if you just give in. She was right. If Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and countless others didn't stand up for their human rights, would African Americans have achieved the equality they longed for? If Edie Windsor and the Stonewall Rioters hadn't persistently fought for equal rights for the LGBTQ plus community, would they have gotten them? And that's why we have to be the change. And second generation, we are the new generation, in touch with social media, in touch with the rest of the world. Imagine what we could do. Imagine the change we could bring to this world. There's so much that can be done about these issues because in a new day and age, the narrative is in our hands. We have the power to change things. So what can we do? We can share our stories online. We can build communities of people who face the same things we face. We can connect with people and we can spread our message. We're all in the same boat, all of us. And together, we'll make it to shore. Thank you.